Story 1. How loud and heard stupid people are. Thank you for all the upvotes. This is about much more than fake internet karma points. I sincerely appreciate all the conversations being had on this subject and all the replies. It gives me hope that at least these thousands of people who upvoted also have issues with this new norm. Story 2. Everyone keeps thumping their chest about how they have common sense and no one else does. But no one focuses on how nobody has common courtesy anymore either. Story 3. Mental health. People's psychology has been weaponized against them, and many people have a hard time coping properly with the level of instant gratification and access to various content the internet offers. We have an abusive relationship with ourselves and the internet, and some people do not have effective boundaries or coping mechanisms for it. Story 4. Bad or distracted driving has always been an issue, but since the COVID-19 pandemic, driver behavior has worsened. Story 5. All the billionaires building bunkers in New Zealand for a massive worldwide catastrophe. Story 6. The billionaires are proudly and openly participating in and controlling the government. The ultra-wealthy have always controlled most governments but previously had to pretend that the public had some influence and provide a few benefits to the bottom 90%. They now realize they no longer need to hide their involvement or give the impression that they are trying to help the working class. Story 7. We are having to pay more and more for drinking water. It is mainly due to corporate greed rather than availability. Story 8. Weather is becoming less predictable and experiencing greater extremes. Extreme weather events that were rare 50 years ago are now becoming normal. Story 9. The impact of artificial intelligence on learning institutions and human development in general. The warning sign comes from colleges. Students are unable to do basic assignments. Students no longer read for homework. Students do not write anymore, to the point that writing is being removed from education. We are going against legislation during a critically important time. Algorithms are addictive and manipulative, yet we are allowing them to functionally raise our children. It is going to be bad. Story 10. The rising anger in the United States indicates that violence may occur sooner rather than later. Story 11. Surprised that not many people are discussing financing. The fact that you can use Affirm and Klarna for small purchases is much more concerning than laugh out loud McNugget payments. This really reminds me of the lines of credit that were being offered right before the 1929 market crash and the Great Depression. Story 12. I am afraid the warning signs were overlooked years ago, and now we are at the beginning of the too late to turn around phase. Story 13. Lack of young people reading books. Books for pleasure stimulate the mind, evoke imagination, and develop language skills. In addition, they can show the progress of an interconnected narrative at a level of complexity that is very hard to achieve in a movie or television series. Story 14. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is currently 427 parts per million, the highest it has been in 14 million years. Story 15. All the crazy people holding signs that say, "The end is near" are gone. Story 16. People acting insane, even violent, in public with absolutely no fear of consequences. Story 17. All climate change warnings and all authoritarian government warnings are like red lights and stop signs. Society is ignoring many warnings because people are focused on their phones. Story 18. How indifferent and hostile we are becoming toward each other. Story 19. The government is starting to line our streets with armed military personnel under the guise of keeping us safe. Story 20. The United States economy is about to decline and cause many people to lose a significant amount of money, especially from retirement accounts. Everyone collectively breathed a sigh of relief when the economy did not immediately decline in the spring. But what happened was many companies stockpiled before the tariffs really took effect. That stockpile is now decreasing. The correction is coming, and it is going to cost many people a significant amount of money. Story 21. Service delivery is failing in the United States. We have a service economy, and most service delivery is getting worse by any observable metric, including timelines and quality. I am not someone who believes the United States is always great, and there are many issues today. However, the United States still holds significant influence in the global economic society, And if it declines, it could cause widespread problems worldwide. Story 22. Young men are underemployed, lonely, and about to become militant. Story 23. The establishment is bending over backwards to undermine the following essential services that endeavor to create a well-informed electorate: free press, public education, state-sponsored scientific research, establishment of a state-preferred religion, denial of facts stated by state and local power that do not conform, increased taxes levied on consumers, family planning. They want you poor, uninformed, motivated only by feeding your 5 children, and too tired to do anything other than labor to support your family. They want all specialized work traditionally reserved for humans to be taken over by artificial intelligence. The middle class has been shrinking for decades, but there are still too many of us for them to control completely. They do not want you to have a ladder to climb. Story 24. How much time do you have? Just to name a few. Everyone is so addicted to the dopamine drip from their phones that they have no ability to process serious information before moving on to the next fix. This has created a very serious accountability problem. Decades of vilifying education have made the average person dangerously easy to manipulate. Lack of financial literacy in core education is creating increasingly dangerous time bombs due to people or organizations exploiting that ignorance. Vilifying intelligence and education is a tactic for controlling people through forced ignorance. This is a big red flag that is being ignored. Artificial intelligence is a snake eating its own tail without universal basic income or universal living income. People need meaningful work to do. We have not taken happiness seriously enough. Without looking at available metrics, it seems that people are epically miserable right now, and it is going to have a very bad end. Greed has gotten absurdly out of control and is the reason for many of the problems we have, including those already mentioned. Climate change has been ongoing for a while. All in all, we have missed the point of life in many ways and are ripping each other apart either because someone got us all worked up, like when you get excited and your dog gets excited too, or because we are greedily harming others for material things. It takes painful struggle for us to calm down and realize we were making a mistake. When this all comes to a head, hopefully there will be some collective growth. Story 25. The rapid consolidation of power under an authoritarian administration. If you have ever read books like The Dictator's Handbook or Why Nations Fail, what is happening is a textbook process. Story 26. The rampant belief in conspiracy theories, false news articles, and hoaxes has caused people to lose trust in any source of facts. When you point to scientists or journalists, the excuse is that they are bought and paid for, corrupt, or part of the conspiracy. What do you do when there is literally no way to prove anything? Facts no longer matter. We are in a post-factual society. There are now 2 groups: those who still believe in an independent truth and those who do not. This division is crippling. Story 27. Millennials are dying from cancer at alarming rates. Story 28. The increasing levels of type 2 diabetes and Crohn's disease in people under 30 are due to the high amount of ultra-processed food in the typical Western diet. Story 29. Absolutely everything required to survive, food, shelter, water, costs money. There are no social programs in place to catch you. You will never qualify for 90% of programs if you become disabled tomorrow. Healthcare has been monetized into scams repeatedly, and it is too late to fix. We will be dead in 30 years, and the world as a whole in 200. Story 30. When no one can afford anything, people tend to become upset. Story 31. Lack of intellectual curiosity and downplaying of human intuition and lived experience. Story 32. The fact that everyone feels burned out, anxious, or lonely, and instead of addressing the root problems, we just keep calling it normal life. Story 33. The worldwide epidemic of loneliness, the collapse of third spaces, and the general rising cost of living have left many people who are not currently in school unable to make or maintain social and romantic relationships. The outcry over Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer version 5 a few weeks ago is one symptom of this. Some people were always going to turn a chatbot into a waifu, but many more are turning to this placebo of emotional validation because they have no path to that very real need from a genuine source. Story 34. American housing rental companies are gradually merging. Our housing market is consolidating. Story 35. The younger generation is being raised on screens. I know it has always been the case that older generations talk about kids these days, but this is different. I have friends whom I otherwise respect laughing about how they never see their teenagers because they are always in their rooms on their phones, always with earbuds in when they are around. Parents themselves are distracted by screens, so there is no reason they should think anything of it. I see families out to dinner with the kids buried so deep in their screens that they do not even order their own food. In my parents' groups, I see parents who withdraw their kids from school because they are too anxious to go. Kids whose only friends are through gaming platforms. Kids addicted to pornography before they hit puberty. Kids without any sense of empathy because they have never had to interact with another person in any meaningful way. Everyone else might as well be a non-player character. We can celebrate that teens are having less sex, drinking less, and doing less of all the bad things that were previously hallmarks of problematic teen behavior, but it is not because they are making smarter decisions. It is because they do not even have an opportunity for those decisions to come up. An entire generation is being robbed of the human experience that literally every other generation that ever existed had. I remember people talking about the harms of kids and television when I was growing up, but this is actually near constant without escape. The physical isolation, the anxiety and depression, the bombardment of unrestricted media, the lack of social skills. What happens when these kids are grown? This is all unknown. Story 36. In this thread, people do not know the meaning of the word ignore. Most of the top comments address topics that are discussed continuously on social media, in opinion editorials in the mainstream media, and by opposition politicians. Story 37. Society is moving away from permanent ownership toward temporary usage, resulting in higher long-term costs. People no longer own movies. They subscribe to streaming services. Due to interest rates and stagnant housing prices, many rent instead of buying homes. There is a reliance on large capitalistic corporations for things individuals should own themselves, which can be taken away without consequence or warning. Access to these things exists only because the provider's incentives are aligned to allow it. If those incentives change, access to essential items may be lost. Story 38. The United States is experiencing warning signs of fascism. Story 39. People are neglecting their children's emotional well-being from birth onward, creating an entire class of killers and sociopaths. Story 40. Vaguely waves hands around to indicate everything. Story 41. The widespread use and increasing acceptance of dehumanizing language about entire groups of people on social media is driven by government-operated troll factories. Story 42. Housing is a basic human need and not an investment. Story 43. I do not know what Donald Trump did today, yesterday, or the day before. Story 44. Many of our freedom-loving countrymen and countrywomen are pretty comfortable with authoritarianism when it is on their side and have ignored the lessons of history. Story 45. The alarming increase in male suicides is being overlooked. Since 2010, young male suicides have risen by over 30%. This rise coincides with when the term involuntary celibate became popular and the neglect of men's mental health intensified, though men's mental health has rarely been taken seriously. Even before this increase, males accounted for the vast majority of suicides. The issue is often dismissed or mocked. This is unacceptable. It needs to stop. Story 46. The rise of the far right has been happening across the globe for years now, and with the election of Donald Trump, it emboldened them to bring forth their hate. Story 47. The ticking time bomb that is increased extreme weather events. Story 48. When people do not care that a person who is in the United States legally with no criminal record is sent to a death camp in another country, it is troubling. Others who are deported because they exercise their right to freedom of speech peacefully face unfair treatment. Story 49. Climate change is being openly ignored by major polluting countries led by far-right corporate interests. Story 50. Narrow-mindedness has brought numerous economies to its knees. In order to develop, people have to keep an open mind and not dismiss anything up front that is not their own. Part of society ignores this warning, part of it sees it, and another part will see it when it is too late. Story 51. How exhausted and fatigued everyone is, yet nothing is being done to reduce our burdens. Story 52. The most militaristic nation in the world, which also has a disproportionate effect on the global economy, is currently led by a man who cannot remember the end of his sentences, believes he is ordained by God to be a dictator, has no understanding of cause and effect, and is controlled by the Christian nationalist movement. Setting aside political slogans, this is a significant problem. Story 53. Accountability. No one wants to accept blame or responsibility anymore because we are busy catering to feelings. Ego or feelings be damned, we need to start calling out and addressing people for their mistakes. Story 54. All of them. We are ignoring all the warning signs. Climate change, the rise of fascism, and the resurgence of racism. All of it. Story 55. Sovereign citizens, housing, underpayment of workers, high taxation of workers, immigration, and climate change. We are literally imploding. Story 56. Bad influence. Deceiving ignorant people. Deception comes in many forms, but I find adults deceiving others with books, podcasts, and other misleading content to be the worst offenders. Why? They influence adults into believing in a false reality. This is the main reason why we are in this difficult timeline. People literally believed that taking an antiparasitic medication would cure a viral infection, and as a result, nothing happened except they remained sick, suffered potential liver or kidney damage, lost money, and some even died. It was not that this was the problem. The problem is that people believed it and continue to do so. This is just one small example. Story 57. We are stuck in a society that is so consumed by exaggerated or fabricated issues that it can no longer recognize, let alone fix, the actual serious problems we face. Story 58. How close to real is the dead internet theory? Reddit is swarming with bot activity. You can see it in almost every post. It seems the bots wait for any moment to inject the dead syndrome or any other anti-political message into the discussion. Young people without critical thinking skills simply accept it all. Story 59. Honestly, the warning signs have been ignored for a long time. We passed the off-ramp about 10 exits ago. People need to read history more and understand the direction we are heading globally, namely the French Revolution and what led to the world wars. Global wealth has gone unchecked and created three classes: the oligarchs, the politicians, and everyone else. The top two may have the money and power, but the last class has the numbers. It is going to get ugly. Story 60. The sheer number of warning signs is causing many people to retreat into existential apathy. Story 61. Mental health overall declines as social media use has increased. Story 62. Everything the United States of America is doing serves as the biggest warning sign. Story 63. Society in general is becoming more comfortable and confident with expressing ignorance. The effect of social media is increasing. Story 64. In the United States, elected officials manipulate electoral district boundaries to influence who votes for them. In contrast, in Canada, electoral boundaries are set by an independent commission. The number of seats and their locations are also determined by this commission, which enforces election finance regulations that exclude entities such as super political action organizations and corporations being considered as persons for election purposes. This system helps ensure that climate change solutions are not subordinate to the desires of the ultra-wealthy. Climate change is real, as evidenced by floods, hurricanes, and wildfires. It is unwise to pledge allegiance to a flag while a corrupt leader is in charge, working to undermine the democratic process during his lifetime. Story 65. Ocean temperatures are rising due to climate change. Besides the other ways climate change will make our planet unlivable, the collapse of the oceans will kill us all if politicians, corporations, and oligarchs cannot get our act together. Story 66. National Guard in cities. The coup is happening before our eyes. Story 67. Trump signing executive orders that are contrary to the Constitution and Supreme Court rulings. Story 68. This current administration is attempting to change America in a harmful way. It resembles a totalitarian regime. Story 69. The replies in this thread are deeply concerning. It is troubling to see such a gross display of illiteracy, where most responses focus on things I do not like about modern times, rather than demonstrating even a basic understanding of the premise of the thread. People seem eager to read and reinterpret the text to suit their own interests, and this trend is extremely destructive. The number of times in online discourse when I have to insist that a poster actually read what they are replying to in full, rather than start responding after reading often less than half the text, is also deeply worrying. If something is worth responding to, it is worth reading properly and ensuring you understand what is being communicated. Story 70. People are not quiet in libraries anymore. Worse, people who should know better defend this. Story 71. Everywhere I go, people are glued to their phones and do not interact with strangers or even their own groups sometimes. I do not know what the warning is, but I feel like it is getting worse. Story 72. A warning sign. The house is burning down around you. Are the troops in the streets and the president ignoring laws not enough? Story 73. The warning started when President Ronald Reagan released seriously mentally ill individuals onto the streets, and no one cared. When corporations gained more power than the people and no one cared. When disabled individuals, seniors, and children were abused, and no one cared. It is all over but the crying. What happened to some now happens to most. Story 74. We are far beyond simple signs. A sign would be when you speed on the street and an officer wants to have a word with you and lets you go with a warning. But with all the rampaging problems with diversity, equity, and inclusion controversy, immigration and customs enforcement controversy, bigger gaps between rich and poor, job fatigue, and many other problems, it is more like the speeder did not want to have a word with the officer, tried to flee the scene, and soon will be put in cuffs. Story 75. The more I have watched the opening scene where Jeff Daniels gives a brutal answer why the United States of America is not the greatest is something more Make America Great Again supporters need to watch. Other countries are outperforming us, and the United States is starting to look like a person who does not need a second trip to the buffet. This is not a warning sign but an observation. Also, I met a neighbor who just retired from the United States Secret Service. He said having the National Guard armed with weapons is a horrible idea. He predicts it will be less than 6 months before they shoot someone without probable cause and will not be held accountable for their actions. He said if that happens, the situation is about to become very serious because the administration is going to look the other way. Story 76. Religious extremists gaining political power with the intention to expand their control. Extremists exist in all religions, but the biggest threat right now comes from Qatar. Story 77. I read this question and just started to laugh out loud. Anyone else? Story 78. People are not buying overpriced cars that fall apart within 6 months at high interest rates. Story 79. Social media combined with artificial intelligence is making us foolish, complacent, and turning us into self-centered zombies. There, I said it. Even my beloved Reddit is not helping. Story 80. People think someone is wrong when they actually think differently. Story 81. According to the environment community, there are many dire warnings being ignored right now. Daily posts provide excellent information and links to articles about climate change impacts. Story 82. Honestly, there are so many that it scares me. I am not exaggerating either. Story 83. Mass extinctions of native species in New England, United States of America. Living in the same piece of woods for 60 years, I noticed the change. American beech, white pines, white ash, and eastern hemlocks are experiencing a massive die-off. All the associated species are declining with them. In many areas, the forest canopy is gone. Story 84. Some parents give impressionable toddlers iPads with YouTube, not the kids' version, and let them watch all day. However, there is a lot of inappropriate content on YouTube Kids as well, if not more. Story 85. Every month is getting hotter on average every year over the past few decades. Story 86. People are astonishingly bad at critical thinking right now. Story 87. What is not a warning sign that society is ignoring right now? Story 88. So many teenagers are being violent towards others. What is happening with the kids? Story 89. The fact that everyone is addicted to dopamine and nobody seems to care. Scroll, click, buy, binge, repeat. Meanwhile, attention spans are fried, and nobody can sit in silence for 30 seconds anymore. Story 90. Global warming, climate collapse, and ecological devastation are happening now. They are not hypotheticals or preventable future possibilities. They are today's reality, whether we acknowledge them or not. The sixth mass extinction is already well underway. All manner of secondary effects will continue to increase for at least the next few centuries, including the collapse of water and food systems, famine, regional and possible global conflict, and an increase in all causes of mortality. Story 91. Less than 0.1% of the population know how to build and maintain the systems that the rest rely on daily. Story 92. Global birth rate decline will have widespread consequences during our lifetimes. Story 93. Most of the public thinks that if something is popular, then it means it is good or right. Story 94. All the aging baby boomers will need end-of-life healthcare simultaneously, collapsing, overcrowding, and bankrupting the entire system. Nobody wants to think or talk about it, but the future is approaching. Story 95. Young men are deciding that education, family, and any sense of community beyond their close friends is not worth the effort. By a strange effect of social engineering, the socialization skills emphasized for girls are the same ones that tend to promote doing well in school. Boys are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder at much higher rates. While it is known that it is harder to diagnose girls, boys are often given these labels, medicated, and written off as average or poor students. The rates of college acceptance are becoming heavily skewed, with some coeducational institutions approaching almost 60-40 female to male ratios. This leads to a secondary concern or social phenomenon called male dropout. This phenomenon occurs when a space becomes majority women and is often run by women, causing men to stop using that space because it is considered a woman's role or space. Teaching is a clear example, where the number of male teachers has significantly declined below the high school level and continues to drop. Many boys and young men are beginning to see education as something for women. Similarly, the dominance of figures like Asmongold, Andrew Tate, and Joe Rogan has influenced many young boys to have a skewed view of what a relationship should be. Young people today often do not see their parents' relationships as models they want to emulate. I am an elder millennial. My parents are late baby boomers. Growing up, I wanted a relationship similar to my parents because, even when they fought, they clearly loved and complemented each other. My parents raised me and my sister with liberal values but maintained traditional home and gender roles. My father was the provider type, while my mother carried a disproportionate share of the emotional and mental load of managing the household. I am married and understand why many women do not want marriages like those of the baby boomer generation. I still believe that being in a long-term committed relationship is fulfilling, rewarding, and beneficial for most people. However, as women have decided that staying with partners who are not equal is no longer acceptable, many young men have come to believe that partnering is a scam or that their abilities and efforts will never be enough for a woman to want to be with them. Once someone adopts this mindset, it is easy to become involved in incel or player communities. Dating is not the only way young men are rejecting family. More men are rejecting having children or being involved in raising them. Young men face greater social stigma for not moving out of their parents' homes, but in many cases, they are also not meaningfully contributing to those homes. They live at home but minimally interact with family. This is problematic, and the main response so far has been to mock the situation. Just as young men have given up on education and family, they are minimally involved in their communities. Data shows that women volunteer more, know more of their neighbors, participate in local government at higher rates, and home ownership is increasingly dominated by working women as well. Meanwhile, the communities that young men have turned to tend to be online and often more willing to discuss open violence against their neighbors. This is the militarization or gangification of a generation. It is troubling and frightening. I do not know how to fix these issues. I do not know how to convince young men that women's refusal to be second-class citizens does not make their lives worse or less valuable. Story 96. Mental health issues are linked to income inequality. Greater income inequality means more people will suffer. Story 97. The lack of ownership of the things you buy. Every day we are getting closer to a dystopian world where you own nothing and are expected to be happy. Story 98. The military presence in Washington, District of Columbia, will probably remain through the next election process. That is very concerning. Story 99. Floods, fires, plagues, dictatorships, suppression of education, Andrew Tate, and other abusive individuals. Story 100. Attention deficit, selfishness and egoism, anger, variable truth. Story 101. The United States has become a police state, and our constitutional rights are eroding every day. Story 102. Carbon count. The daily atmospheric carbon dioxide readings from Mauna Loa, Hawaii, on August 23 stood at 425.53 parts per million, up from 399.30 parts per million in August 2015. Story 103. How do you keep a hatred for a particular group of people going for 75 years? You teach children in schools to hate. Those children grow into adults. Then their children go to the same schools and learn the same hatred. It has worked in the Middle East for decades, and it is now starting in the United States too. Prager University is creating animated children's programming stating that slavery was not that bad. This is what children in the United States are starting to learn now. If you think racism is bad now, wait until the United States gets to where the Middle East currently is. I do not think it will even take 75 years. Story 104. The wealthy are building bunkers while climate chaos escalates. This is a classic case of ignoring the slow-motion disaster in favor of stockpiling for the apocalypse. Story 105. The rubber trees that most of the world depends on are facing an ecological disaster. Story 106. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of goodness than malice. Tolerance will reach a level where intelligent people will be forbidden to think to avoid offending others. Story 107. Artificial intelligence. And it is not a warning sign. It is a forest of warning signs. Story 108. The United States has multiple literal concentration camps right now. Story 109. COVID-19, bro, sorry, it's not popular to talk about. But literally all the scientific research shows that it is not good to get, no matter how mild the infection symptoms are. Every infection damages your organs, especially your brain. It is making us less intelligent with each infection. No exageración. The government confused us on purpose, and we have been lying to each other since then. Yes, this virus is still around and circulating widely. It is not just a bad cold. Story 110. At least in the United States, there is the complete collapse and surrender of our democracy and its institutions. Story 111. Norms that have kept the world running a certain way are being destroyed without plans to replace them or mitigate the impact of their absence. We are in free fall. We will not know what it means until we hit rock bottom. Story 112. The rise of anti-Semitism is a telltale sign of either impending collapse or calamity followed by collapse. Most of it occurs online, but online activity spills out into the wider world. Story 113. The president is deploying armed military forces in our cities to address crime, but the highest crime rates are in Republican states. Story 114. Weather changes, storms, flooding, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, war, rising costs, diseases, many possibly man-made and escaped from laboratories, insect population decline, solar storms, changes in the Gulf Stream, terrorist attacks, increased cyber attacks, addiction to social media, and mental health decline. Story 115. True anti-intellectualism exists throughout all levels of society. Story 116. The legal status of possessing a specific plant or group of plants can irreparably damage someone's entire life trajectory. Story 117. The asteroid Apophis is arriving in 2029, and efforts are focused on dismantling the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Instead of planning a mission to place a probe on it as it passes close by or studying it, this is concerning because it will come about 20,000 miles from Earth's surface. One of the next times it passes by, it might pose a threat to us. Story 118. How the ultra-rich seem to be preparing for some apocalyptic event. They are building bunkers, preparing for war, and trying to earn as much short-term profit as possible, almost as if they do not expect us to last. Story 119. Premeditated, calculated, engineered divisiveness. Left on their own, 97% of humans would get along just fine with only minor nonviolent disagreements. Story 120. Anything happening in United States politics is a huge warning sign. Story 121. Donald Trump, Make America Great Again, Orange Chicken, the Grand Old Party, Nazis. Take your pick. It is actually all of them. Story 122. The ongoing collapse of the global climate system that sustains life. Story 123. How countries are either moving far left or far right reminds me of the period after World War I. Story 124. It would honestly be harder to find one we are not ignoring. Story 125. Billionaires use media they have acquired in all formats to maintain their wealth and create division among the masses. Story 126. The rise of global fascism again. Not even a century has passed since we had to learn that very hard lesson, and we have already forgotten it. As before, these fascists are tolerated because of free speech. Story 127. Artificial intelligence is going to destroy the world. It is a clear and present threat 100 times worse than climate change. Story 128. This will be a very controversial statement, but I will say it. The rise of radical Islamism is the biggest threat I see to society as a whole. I only mean the radical part, not the general Muslim population. These radicals could cause the world to regress by 1,000 years. Not a single significant invention has come from Muslim-majority countries in recent history. Story 129. Effect of pornography on our society and relationships. This is the first generation that has unfiltered access to pornography, while previous generations went through hoops to obtain it. Many men, especially, use it as a cheap fix for dopamine. Unlike alcohol or drugs, it costs almost nothing, is used in secret, and has no short-term side effects. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.